Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation to take a look at another premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be looking at the Pan-Asian, or Republic of China, Tier 7 premium destroyer Loyang. For this review we'll start with the history, move into analysis, run down the stats, and then finish off with some gameplay, but if you do want to skip any part of that, you should see some time codes down in the description. The history of the Loyang begins as the history of the USS Benson, lead ship of her class and the Tier 6 American tech tree destroyer in World of Warships Legends. Laid down in May 1938, she was launched in November 1939 and commissioned into service in July 1940. The Benson is named for Admiral William Shepard Benson, who served the United States between 1877 and 1919, retiring shortly after participating in the negotiations that would bring World War I to a close. Admiral Benson died in May 1932, but the ship was sponsored by his widow. Like the Gleaves class that succeeded them, the Bensons in general, and the Benson in particular, saw much service in the U.S. so-called neutrality patrols, wherein American destroyers would patrol an ever-increasing amount of water along Canada, the United States, Central and South America, attempting to ostensibly secure the free flow of goods within neutral waters, then to facilitate American commerce, and ultimately culminating in the arguably not-so-neutral shoot-on-sight policy against submarines within this zone. The Benson's tasks were initially as part of the Patrol Zone 0, which was the furthest north section of the patrol at that point from Newfoundland to the 40th parallel, but eventually she made it as far north as Reykjavik as part of Task Force 19, which arrived in Iceland in 1941 to help land American troops for the occupation of Iceland. After that point, she became a frequent escort for convoys between Newfoundland and Reykjavik, with the rockiest part of her escort service being in the months actually leading up to American involvement in World War II. She would lose one transport on her first convoy and was part of the same convoy as the Reuben James when that destroyer was famously sunk by a German U-boat on October 31st, 1941. Following the official declaration of war, Benson was intended to be part of Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa, alongside the U.S. Navy battleship Massachusetts, but a collision with another friendly destroyer sent her back to port for repairs. She did make it to the Mediterranean, though, to support landings in Sicily. This would have been a combination of shore bombardment duty and a hefty amount of AA work thanks to determined defense by Axis air support, and it is here that she would get her first aerial kill. Also notable, the Benson escorted USS Savannah, a Brooklyn-class light cruiser which had been struck by a Fritz X guided bomb, to Malta after she was hit. Towards the end of the war, Benson transferred to the Pacific Theater, where she would serve as part of the screen for USS Lexington during strikes against Wake Island. Following that, she was stationed in Ulithi and patrolled the waters around that atoll and around Okinawa, Japan. In total, Benson would earn 4 battle stars for her service in World War II. She participated in 6 major operations, including 4 land invasions. After her initial 2 convoys, she was part of 16 additional convoys comprising a total of more than 500 ships without loss, eventually making crossings all the way to North Ireland, escorting convoys in the Mediterranean, and even after the war acting as a convoy escort in the South Pacific. Following the cessation of hostilities, though, the Benson would be quickly decommissioned and laid up in March 1946. In 1954, she was transferred to the Republic of China, also sometimes referred to as the nation of Taiwan. At this point, Loyang's armament consists of 4 5-inch dual-purpose guns, 2 40mm twin Bofors guns, 6 20mm Oerlikons, 2 depth charge tracks, and 4 depth charge launchers. Later on, she was also equipped with a Hedgehog anti-submarine projector, as well as 6 torpedo tubes. But to the extent that the Loyang in-game resembles the Benson at any given point during its service history, the model would probably be closest to its 1944 configuration rather than anything used by the Republic of China. The Loyang was lucky to serve at a time of peace, or at least in a tense stalemate that continues to this day, as the bloody coup led by Mao occurred in 1949. The Loyang is important because it marked the first use of American ships in the defense of Taiwan. The high watermark of its career while serving the Republic of China was briefly as the flagship of Chiang Kai-shek's inspection of island defenses around Taiwan in 1958, and she would serve the Republic of China for about 20 years. In early 1974, an inspection of the aging destroyer finds she was beginning to fall apart. She was taken out of service in November 1974 and broken up as scrap the following year. As for where the Loyang falls in World of Warships legends, she comes from an American lineage, so it makes sense that just like other four-turreted American destroyers, she struggles a bit when trying to find her place. The folks who are probably going to enjoy the Loyang are going to be looking at it either in the unknown future where she might actually have a suitable destroyer commander, or who are confident in their consumable options and are looking to run her specifically in competitive division situations like ranked, arena, and the clan battle scene, which is equally as fictional right now as the aforementioned commander choice that would have made this an easier recommendation. The Loyang does enjoy having two considerably different torpedo options, though you might say that neither of them are very compelling. You have something very close to the stock Fletcher torpedoes, or you can choose something closer to the upgraded but relatively weak Tier 6 Benson torpedoes. In terms of upgrades over the Benson, all you really pick up is about 200 meters worth of improved sea detectability, about 2,000 hit points of health, and access to a very powerful sonar. The sonar here is really what's going to drive your decision, because presently, in a standard battle, this has a fair degree of usefulness, but the Pan-Asian line is the only line, if you even want to call it a line since it's only one ship right now, that doesn't have access to twist and track or perceptive. This puts it at a noticeable disadvantage when playing an anti-destroyer role, while also being a torpedo boat with less than optimal torpedo performance too. A deficiency punctuated by a combination of either low damage or short range with a punishingly long torpedo reload no matter what you decide. And running the sonar does come at the expense of your mobility, so even if you don't exactly have a low top speed, the excellent sonar presently comes at the expense of having nothing that can really help you should you need to reposition in a hurry. You would imagine that the commander problem on this ship is eventually going to be fixed, but whether it's in 2 months or 2 years, it's really hard to say, and even then there's no real good way of knowing exactly what we'll be getting. As we go into stats, this is the only Pan-Asian ship in the game right now, but since this really is an American ship, we'll try to pay some attention to that as we talk about where the Loyang fits into the game. When we look at survivability, Loyang has about 2,000 more hit points than the Benson, and about 2,000 less than the average for a destroyer at Tier 7. That puts it more or less in lightning territory and a relatively small 600 hit points lower than the Fletcher. Armor is nothing really important here. This 1 to 20 millimeters might look a bit peculiar, but suffice it to say the 1 millimeter is the canvas top on your super firing rear turret, and the 21 millimeters is 1 millimeter higher than you would expect for a ship that's already in the game. And it happens to be a portion of the deck in the middle of the ship. While in theory that does change the math on how a 127 millimeter gun would interact with that armor, it's hard to say how much of the deck is 19, 20, or 21, and I will say I suspect that this extra 1 millimeter of deck armor will not make a noticeable difference in how other American destroyers can bully this thing when visibility is not an issue. In terms of artillery, you have 4 turrets, each mounting one 5-inch gun. You can fire out to a fairly average 10.8 kilometers. You have a very fast reload, as you would expect, and exceptional turret rotation. Just like American guns, you have the low 5% fire chance. Because you have one less turret than the Fletcher, you do have noticeably lower damage per minute, being just a bit high on the HE side of things and just a bit low on the AP side of things, and you'd be forgiven if you thought of just categorizing this as average. In any case, between access to better skills, more hit points and better damage per minute. If you prefer to think of the Loyang as a gunboat, you're on the low side of performance for this tier, and in terms of fire starters who harass battleships, you've got the lowest fire chance among tier 7 destroyers, except for the odd Z-23 running with 128mm guns. Torpedoes get a bit more interesting, but a lot of folks will consider this a choice between two bad outcomes. In either configuration, you have two quintuple launchers. The torpedo performance, on screen now, is essentially exactly the same as the upgraded Benson torpedoes from Tier 6. The advantage here is that they do have a very usable range, and their low sea detectability can make them among the hardest torpedoes to dodge if you've appropriately led your target and there's no sonar going on. The bad side of them is that these are the lowest damage destroyer torpedoes at the tier, and at 55 knots they are somewhat challenging to aim. Your alternative is this, which is basically the stock Fletcher torpedoes. Not many people really jump into the Fletcher and love it for its torpedoes. They are at least on the high side of average in terms of speed, and at 16,633 damage, they do more than just tickle your enemy should you happen to hit them. But the reason why no one really likes the Fletcher's torpedoes when stock is the 6.7 kilometer range. It's not exactly unworkable, but it does mean that you need to know how to retreat and deploy islands if you want to be effective on anything other than a YOLO run. No matter which torpedoes you choose, though, you will have pretty slow or very slow reloads, giving the Loyang in either configuration low or very low damage per minute with torpedoes, with really only the Akizuki that has only one set of torpedoes coming in below you. When it comes to AA, you've got a bit more overall AA than the Benson, but a little bit less of this 5 kilometer long range AA. The way that Wargaming rates this versus the Benson is that they are functionally interchangeable. I would probably tell you that the Benson's AA is still better because it does have a bit more long range AA, and since your dual purpose main battery guns are a little bit harder to knock out than a Bofors gun or an Oerlikon, then they tend to stay in the fight a little bit longer once you start taking damage. In any case, you finish more or less in the middle of the pack for all destroyers, a bit higher than average in terms of rating, but a little bit lower than average when it comes to damage per second. In any case, don't expect your AA to convince many carrier players not to strike you. Since the Loyang is at its core an American destroyer, it's really no surprise that she maintains some of the favorable maneuverability characteristics of American knife fighters. At 38 knots, you're just a smidge faster than most destroyers, and with 570 meter turning circle and 2.7 rudder shift, you have excellent agility. The one thing that may hurt the Loyang here is that you're probably going to be running this thing with sonar, which takes the place of your speed boost, and that means if you really need the extra speed, there's no way to get it, and in that case you'll be a little on the slow side. When looking at concealment for this, you'll see a very average destroyer. Generally speaking, you're less stealthy than German and Japanese destroyers. Shockingly, you're about the same sea detectability as American destroyers, and you manage better concealment than most other DDs in the game. As we come to consumables, there's the normal destroyer damage control. After that, you have a smoke generator, and though this shouldn't be a surprise, considering this is an American ship, it is important to note that this does have the long duration of American smoke. After that, you have what I guess you would call a choice, but that choice is presently between a standard speed boost, which will increase your speed 8% for 2 minutes, or sonar. Now, the only way that this is really a choice is if you are getting the Loyang absolutely because you really liked the Sims or the Charles F. Hughes, and you just really wanted to guarantee that you'd be taking a ship like that against tier 7s all of the time, and maybe a few legendary ships if you're really lucky. First thing that you'll want to do though, when you get the Loyang, if you do get the Loyang, is go switch this out for sonar. Because you don't just have any normal sonar, you have near god tier levels of sonar. This 5.4 kilometers is both a kilometer longer than the next best destroyer sonar at tier 7, but a mere 200 meters shorter than the sonar found on German cruisers at this tier. And this is probably the one thing about this ship that should really determine if you want or not. Essentially, Is this sonar worth everything else that's wrong with this ship? And I will absolutely tell you that opinions will vary here. So here we go into some gameplay. We're going to be on Fault Line, we're going to be playing Capture the Base, and we're going to be in the Loyang. I will go ahead and immediately put my commander up on the screen. I will then very shortly thereafter say I have no idea what I'm doing here. This ship is kind of in the middle of a gunboat and a torpedo boat. The fact that you have Ding Rushan and he's got this ability that helps your main battery reload just ever so slightly quicker makes you think you'd want to lean into the gunboat position, but there's not a lot of skills he offers right now that'll help you do that. Meanwhile, there's not a lot of skills that he has that help you run a really good torpedo boat, so we're kind of in the middle, and I can't give you anything more than that other than to say, if you get the Loyang, you're going to get this commander. I would almost never use his inspiration on anything, so chances are maybe that's not as big of a selling point for you. In any case, we have rolled out to the outside here. As you can see, since we do have pretty good sea detectability, we spot the Kiev before the Kiev spots us. We do have a ton of torpedoes. We are running the high damage but shorter range torpedoes in this replay, and that's just because I don't think shooting 11,000 damage torpedoes at things is going to do the sort of awful things that you can do to ships like that if you have 16,000 damage right off the bat. It is going to require quite a bit more effort to be any good at hitting ships with 6.7 kilometer torpedoes when you only have, I think I have in the area 5.3 kilometers detection. That said, getting Kiev out of the way is a nice start, but it is unfortunately just a Russian destroyer. Whatever you think about Russian destroyers, they tend not to be quite the difference makers that other destroyers tend to be. In any case, we open up with our main battery. You see we go ahead and switch over to HE because apparently we were doing something weird the last game. Now it does look like our friends over here on this side are moving away. You notice the conspicuous spotting that happened there for quite a few seconds. That was based on the radar of a Russian cruiser. I do believe that we have a Chapayev over here with us. Or not Hotnik, whatever. As we start to come around the backside of this island, we do open up. We are unfortunately the only ship that can actually see him. So for a moment, I do think that that's about as good as we're going to get. But looking at that mini-map, you can see that our other cruiser here is actually nosing in towards him. So since I am supposedly his buddy, I'm going to try to be his buddy. One thing about this ship is that it does have really lazy firing arcs, just like American destroyers typically do. They tend to get buffed out of this sort of sky-high, ultra-lazy shell arc. We'll see if that happens here. But it does have its advantages. Here you can see we are firing over a couple of different islands. You are just a destroyer, and unfortunately, since you do only have 4 guns, we're only doing, you know, a little bit of help me damage here along the way. Something has spotted us. I get this strong sense that it isn't something that's actually in front of me. Those 5 torpedoes that just passed our friendly cruiser probably came from the Adhotnik herself. And at this point, I am pushing behind this island. I lose my spot exactly when I expect to lose my spot. So I am fairly certain somebody's taking a straight line towards our base. Now, I may be wrong to do this, but I believe that whatever is going to happen to that cruiser is probably going to happen to that cruiser whether or not I help it or not. This battleship, on the other hand, maybe it would be a better use of my time to try to help him. Now, in spite of the fact that we're only 5 minutes into the game, and maybe 5.5 minutes, anyway, both teams have lost almost half of their strength. And of course, I don't want to get down on ships. Also, this is the weak side of this particular map. So pushing on this side is really not a great idea unless you know that you can win. We are making almost our best speed towards where we think the enemy destroyer might be. But this kind of does highlight one of the problems with the Loyang right now. With the different commander setup, literally with any other destroyer commander, we would be able to essentially figure out where in the world this other destroyer was that was spotting me just a minute ago. Now, it doesn't look like he's in the middle of the map, and I don't want to push too far out there because you can see on the minimap that there's at least a couple of ships that might want to push back. And obviously, I was not counting on our cruiser even living that long. But with him getting taken out, then there's really nothing there to support me. So I'm going to go ahead and head back towards our base. This is indecision that you would not experience on pretty much any other destroyer. And it's actually one of the reasons that I kind of highlight this. The Loyang is probably a decent ship in and of itself. I wouldn't say that it's overpowered. I wouldn't even say it's towards the top of the power scale at all. Its 5.4 kilometer sonar is super useful. And honestly, it makes it kind of feel like the American version of a German DD. And in this case, you have even better sonar than a German DD. But unfortunately, right now, it's really hard to figure what you're supposed to do with it sometimes. And even without Twist and Tracker Perceptive, it would be super nice just to be able to really spec into guns or into torpedoes. Now, in this case, while I've been rambling on about nonsense, my personal feelings and what have you, I did activate my sonar. You can see sonar, again, works perfectly well through islands, and at 5.4 kilometers, this is why I often refer to German sonar as Wasserradar or water radar. The point being here is it is a super powerful tool, and it's going to be super useful in ranked battle situations. It's obviously quite useful even in this situation. That said, it would be even more useful if I didn't spend a minute and a half driving around wondering where in the world the destroyer was. And this is coming from a person who never used to use RPF. You get used to it, and it's kind of a super useful tool in this sort of situation. This is one of the situations where you probably couldn't tell exactly where the destroyer was. But in any case, I want to complain about something else. Just completely unrelated. I would like this ship better if it had a Republic of China flag on it. Taiwan is a nation. It has a fancy flag, and I like it. I wish it was on this ship. I'm not really sure why, like, the Błyskawica and the Friesland get to fly their national flags, but for whatever reason, I've got this red and gold dragon thing going on. It just doesn't do anything for me. Anyway, back into the gameplay. So we helped our team eliminate that destroyer through the use of our Wasserradar, and now we're going to try to help our team a little bit more by demonstrating how to use these torpedoes. Now we have, once again, right around 5.3 kilometers concealment. If you remember from the beginning of the game, I only have a 12-2 commander on this, which is You know, it's pretty good, but it's not maxed out concealment by any stretch of the imagination. But with the 2 concealment inspirations, we're pretty close. Following our torpedoes in there, we're using control scheme number 2, which is uncommon, but it allows you to follow in torpedoes and shots like that. We do manage to land several good hits on the Vladivostok, and his buddy, the Siegfried, is not too far behind. It looks like all 3 of the remaining enemy battleships are all kind of together. I do open up on the enemy ships because, honestly, I had scored a flood on the Vladivostok, and I figured, why not try to get a fire on him. Now, you do have kind of a long reload in terms of getting your torpedoes reloaded. That said, it's not incredibly painfully long. There are certainly worse things to do, and my 3rd slot for my commander is helping just a little bit to whittle that down to something a little bit more reasonable. If I were able to take something like Subsurface Venture or Torpedo Safari, that would help quite a bit more, both in terms of making my torpedoes quite a bit faster, as well as helping them to reach out just a little bit longer and making this a little bit less of a ship that's reliant on corners. Essentially what you see here is I'm once again trying to lead the Siegfried as he comes around this corner. Siegfried does have sonar. There's no real good way of telling at this point, for me, whether or not he's used it. But we put those torpedoes out there again. They are long enough range to actually reach a target that is either driving towards you or is coming around a corner. So you can do good work with them. And 16,633 damage base is not exactly terrible. It's a little low, but obviously it hurts quite a bit if you're going to eat a couple of them, and launching 10 torpedoes at a time can certainly sink a lot of ships. Now, we are helped a little bit there by the fact that the other folks on my team were able to spot those guys. In this case, we're going to try to use this island. The island actually isn't tall enough to really keep the Colorado from shooting at me. For whatever reason, every battleship that I have been shooting at this week has been more than ready to respond with salvo of oversized shells for my tiny little boat. So we take a pretty good chunk of damage there. Now as we near this much taller part of the island, he probably can't actually respond, and I actually am too close now to shoot around it anyway. Unfortunately, if I wanted to do anything more, I'm not really going to get the chance because, as you can see, I have driven up upon this island so close that I can't really do anything. So the game ends, we get a win. That's great times. And that should get us to my closing thoughts on the Loyang. So, long story short, I don't know. There's part of me that thinks this is a very useful ship hiding behind a poor commander. There's part of me that also thinks it might be a little undertooled for the job. I think that it probably doesn't need to make the straight up trade between a speed boost and having that sonar. I think that this ship would probably be fair even if it had both. And I think there are definitely people who are going to do really well with it. I think most of those people are probably high-end team players. The people who can probably make the most out of her sonar to bully caps, even if this ship does have a little bit of a hard time bullying them herself. I think she should naturally lean towards being a gunboat because she is an American ship and the torpedoes on it are really not spectacular either way you look at it. But even with some better gun performance, she's going to be on the weak end of a gunboat. This is going to need a decent combination of skill, islands, and if that doesn't work, some very accommodating enemies to drive into these torpedoes to make them work. With all that, I'm not even sure this would be a particularly fun ship to play. It just may be a little bit more fun than losing a game in something like ranked or clan battles in some other ship. In any case, those are my thoughts on the Loyang. Please let me know what you think down in the comments below. I hope you all have enjoyed this video, and as always, I will see you on the next one.